When I was growing up, the only video game systems my brother and I had were the original NES and the Super NES. We didn't have a whole lot of games for them either, since our family couldn't afford to just buy a lot of them, but we had friends at school and in the neighborhood we would borrow games from or go over to their houses and play. Then, of course, there was always renting games from Blockbuster for a weekend before having to return them, and even when the Sony PlayStation and Nintendo 64 came out, we remained on the Super Nintendo or, increasingly, on PC since we at least had a computer, as plain as it was. That said, I had a friend who lived across the street who would occasionally let me borrow his N64 or PlayStation to play a game or two, and on one such occasion, there was a demo disc that had an interesting little title on it called Legacy of Kain, Soul Reaver. I remember one night sneaking out of my room to the living room to play the demo for a while since I knew it was precisely the type of game my dad probably wouldn't have liked. Growing up in a conservative Christian home in the 90s, there were certain things we just weren't allowed to do. I remember my brother and I being forbidden from watching gargoyles, for example. Nothing against my dad, mind you. As a parent myself, there are things even today I won't let my kids watch, but that's because it's trash, obviously. Now, to be fair to my dad, there were a lot of things that he would likely admit he overreacted to, but as a parent, you want to do the right thing, and sometimes you see something as being worse than it is. We still don't agree on everything, as one would expect, but there's a mutual understanding that exists now that my brother and I are both raising kids and have a better grasp on the kinds of decisions he had to grapple with when he and my mom were raising us. I say all that to say this. Soul Reaver would probably have been on the do not play list. So, time went on, and I had largely forgot about the game since I didn't have a PlayStation of my own. Then, at Christmas of 2000, my brother decided to buy me a PS1 for Christmas, and the first game I got for it was Final Fantasy Anthology. My collection slowly grew over time, and around my senior year of high school, I was out helping my mom run some errands when I came across a little title that had slipped my memory that was now on the Greatest Hits collection. Given how cheap it was, I snatched it up and immediately began making my way through it. I was in love with it. Not a perfect game, but the atmosphere, the dialogue, the fact that bosses were beat through essentially using the environment against them rather than brute force, puzzle solving, all of it was a demonstration of the whole being greater than the sum of its parts. I got to the very end, saw Kain go through the portal, saw the final cinematic, and then boom! Cliffhanger. I was hooked and devastated at the same time. It was over. And of course, the sequel was only on PS2 and PC, neither of which did I own. I didn't have the money for it, and I wasn't about to ask my parents to foot the bill for it either. So I did the next best thing. I looked up the script for it, printed it out, stapled it together like a book, and read it through and devoured the story. I did the same thing for Blood Omen 2 not long after I nabbed a copy of the original Blood Omen and played through that. I knew everything about the series and everything up until the end of Soul Reaver 2, which, unfortunately, also ended on a cliffhanger. At the time, I was unaware of any plans for another game in the series, but that would soon change. During my freshman year of college, I learned that there would be another entry in the series coming out at the end of that year, Legacy of Kain Defiance. I knew it was going to be only on PS2, and so after selling whatever textbooks I didn't need anymore and making sure I had some sort of cushion for next semester, I came back home, gathered up my PS1 and several titles I no longer wanted, and sold them all to get a PS2 along with Legacy of Kain Defiance. I think I grabbed Kingdom Hearts on sale as well. I went home, I started it up, and immersed myself in the world of Nosgoth once again. From start to finish, I loved every bit of it. I thought the combat was fun, the atmosphere was spot on, the voice acting and story was engaging as always, and instead of just getting to play as Raziel, I got to play as Kain, who had quickly become my favorite character after the events of Soul Reaver 2. And after beating it, I once again felt that sinking feeling in my stomach. Another cliffhanger. A cliffhanger that after 23 years remains unresolved. The dev team split up and went on to other projects. Most notably, Amy Hennig went on to write the Uncharted series, which is why those games' stories are so great. Incidentally, the villain of Uncharted 1 is also voiced by none other than Kain himself, Simon Templeman. Sadly, he doesn't have as many lines in that game as he does as Kain. He was also in an episode of Monk, in case anyone was curious. I always held out hope that the series might get a second look, but it never happened. And then last year, Blood Omen and Blood Omen 2 were put out on PlayStation Plus around the same time that the Soul Reaver 1 and 2 remasters were released. I was ecstatic. I promptly started working on Blood Omen 1 again, and promptly discovered how much I sucked at the game after over 20 years. It felt great. Then it was later announced that Defiance was going to be put out on PS Plus as well. As soon as it dropped, I downloaded it and prepped myself to experience this glorious game once again. It was through this playthrough that I discovered something about the game that had eluded me on my first playthrough, and this is it. Legacy of Kain Defiance is not that great. In fact, it borders on average to kinda sucky. How in the world did I miss this at the time? Probably because I was just so hyped to have it and a PS2 that I overlooked a lot of the flaws, but 23 years later, the nostalgia didn't kick in, and from what I can find, a lot of people had the same problems that I now had with the game way back then. I just wasn't on the internet as much back then, let alone looking up reviews of the game afterward. Believe it or not, we used to play games for fun back then, and didn't always care what randos online thought. Crazy, I know. However, now that I've experienced it again, allow me to expound on what really hurts this game as an online rando myself. First things first, Defiance picks up immediately after the events of Soul Reaver 2, so if you aren't familiar with the story up to that point, you're missing out and you'll be somewhat lost regarding what's going on in this title. Otherwise, the plot structure is pretty simple. Kain and Raziel are both seeking the truth about their respective destinies, but the two of them are separated from each other by 500 years. Kain is in the past, while Raziel is in the present. Well, present being the timeline at the end of Blood Omen 1, anyway, and Kain being in the period before that. Both of them get to experience the same locations at different periods, which on paper is actually pretty cool. Well, I say the same locations, but now that I think about it, I believe Raziel has a few other areas he visits that Kain does not, and the first area is unique to Kain. Other than that, though, there is a significant amount of overlap in locations. The best part of the story, though, is all the lore dumps and dialogue between the characters. The writing for that definitely didn't suffer, I'll say that much, even if there are times where Raziel is laughably dumb and easily manipulated. After the events of Soul Reaver 2, you would think he would have gained some trust in Kain, but nope. The problem, though, is that much of the lore dumps you get are found in the Vampire Citadel, which you visit all too frequently. This is one of the biggest gripes I had with Defiance. Much of Raziel's portion of the game involves having to imbue the Spirit Reaver with every element known to mankind. Light, dark, fire, wind, water, earth, and spirit. Do you want to guess where you go to do that? If you guessed the Vampire Citadel, you would be correct. Every visit past the first two elements plays out the same. Visit the Citadel, fight the spirits of past vampire guardians to fill up the local elemental font, imbue the Reaver with the new element, and then use that element to interact with objects to reactivate the portal back to where you came from. Repeat ad nauseum. This wouldn't be as big of a deal if it wasn't for the fact that every single one just uses the same sort of architecture and designs to the point that each zone in the Citadel just looks the same. It's visually incredibly boring. On the first visit, it looks great, but then you just get sick of it. There's no creativity to it. At least in games like Legend of Zelda, the good series, not Breath of the Wild or Tears, the dungeons all had their own unique flavor to them, their own character. Here, it's just all the same reused assets, just rearranged. Fighting the former Guardians doesn't even feel fun since it's just dodge and hit every time. And then when you have to visit later in Kain's story, you may not have to visit as often, but you spend far more time in those locations than you should. You go through multiple portals to get to the right area that has the fragment of the balance emblem you need, and then you have to backtrack and are put into forced encounters with enemies that are only difficult due to being damage sponges. The best parts of the game are the ones out in the world of Nosgoth itself, but unfortunately, those areas feel few and far between after the amount of time you're stuck in these crappy copy-paste sections. Vorador's mansion is a welcome reprieve from all this, and running around the pillars and the fortress of the Seraphan at the beginning are enjoyable, but they're also distinct from later sections. Avernus Cathedral is a bit too short, but I liked the main auditorium and the catacombs. The cemetery borders on repetitive, but at least not every section looks exactly the same. However, the visits to the Citadel cast a shadow over all the other good sections, and the fact that the objectives are always the same and accomplished the same way is another drag. Then there's the combat. It's not terrible. You beat the crap out of enemies and eventually learn up to 5 different moves, and that's it. That's all you get for the whole game, though combat is never hard enough that you really need more than that. Knockdowns are cheap and can really get annoying, but the worst part of all of it, and the thing that can make combat worse, is the camera angle. Good lord, I didn't notice it the first time I played, but the semi-fixed camera angle in this game is absolutely atrocious. You can wiggle the camera at best, but it really does screw with your ability to see where you're going. Maybe this wasn't such a big deal back then, since a lot of games still used fixed camera angles. I seem to recall Devil May Cry sort of being fixed as well, but that's another I haven't played in a very long time. Today, though, it just feels clunky and awkward, and from what I found online, it felt bad back then too. Again, I loved the story and the characters of the series, and I think all of the story elements are still generally good. But the gameplay really drags the experience down, and that's unfortunate because the Legacy of Kain series deserved better than what it got, especially with how the story has been left hanging for over 2 decades. However, given how this game did, I'm not really surprised in retrospect. So would I recommend playing it? I think it's worth getting the story from it, but that's about it. It's a pretty mediocre title, and I really hate saying that. Watch a playthrough or a cutscene compilation if nothing else. At least that's what I was going to say until they released the remaster just like they did with Soul Reaver 1 and 2, so let's talk about that real quick. Is Legacy of Kain Defiance saved because of the remaster? Well, you get a bunch of nifty little features that didn't exist in the original. You can unlock skins for Kain and Raziel as you go and gather collectibles, which have been doubled as far as I'm aware. Not really a fan of that, but it is what it is. There's an encyclopedia, the ability to go look at cut zones, and even an in-game map for the times that you get turned around. The map also gives you an objective marker in case you need it. The in-game menu is also much easier to access and navigate, and there's even an XP bar that shows you how many more hits you need to do before learning your next power move. The greatest thing about the remaster, though, is the camera. Holy crap, it's a night and day difference. You can actually control the camera 360 degrees, which makes navigation in combat feel so much better. The visuals and character models look great too, as expected. Audio is pretty much exactly the same as in the original, which means the voice acting is still great, and the soundtrack is utterly forgettable. Honestly, there isn't a single track in the entire series that I care about besides Ozar Midrashim, which is an absolute banger when it gets used in certain fights. Also, Key items you pick up now have some flavor text providing some lore about the objects, but even this has a downside. Exploration in the game is never complicated. If you ever see a locked door or a gate, you can always be sure the item to grant access is within the same area. So, do I really need a hint that I need to use this object to open the locked path I just saw? Of course not. It makes me feel like the developers thought modern gamers would be too stupid to put 2 and 2 together, and maybe they are, but this borders on insulting. So, with all of these quality of life changes, the improved visuals, and the improved camera, does that save Legacy of Kain Defiance and elevate it as a better title in the series? No, because the Vampire Citadel still exists. Even if traversing it sucks slightly less, the gameplay loop is just as repetitive as in the original version. I mean, what do you expect? It's a remaster, not a remake. Trophy list kind of sucks too, but that's a whole other discussion for another time. Now, having said that, it's a better experience in this version than the original, and if you're going to play it, I highly recommend picking up this version. Not sure if the deluxe version is worth it, though there are some comics included, as well as the playable demo for the unreleased Dark Prophecy. Was it cool to see what could have been? Sort of. Is it worth shelling out extra money? Meh. Depends on how invested in the series you are. For people like me, I liked seeing the bonus material, but for someone who's never played the series, probably not. Then again, if you're new to the series, I wouldn't recommend starting with Defiance anyway. I don't know if I would even recommend the original Blood Omen as a starting point, though I do believe it should be played to see Kain's origin story. Now, as part of the Deluxe Edition, it also included the newer game that launches at the end of this month, Legacy of Kain Ascendance. This time, it's going to be a 2D side-scroller action platformer featuring Raziel Kain and some chick named LLF that nobody cares about. In fact, there was a graphic novel called Legacy of Kain Soul Reaver The Dead Shall Rise featuring her as well. I've heard nothing good about it, and if that's sort of the backdrop for this game, I'm not holding out hope for it being great. I've been hoping for a new game for over 20 years, but only if it was helmed by the original writers or by people who understood and revered the lore. I'm not optimistic that this is going to be the case, but I'll be playing it regardless to find out rather than prejudging it. However, if it ends up being as disappointing as I fear it may be, well, maybe the franchise should just stay dead instead of having this new life forced onto its unwilling corpse. Better than having it be bastardized into something that doesn't understand what made the original story and characters so compelling. Anyway, that's it for me. I wish I had a better perspective or experience to share. I love and have a deep fondness for what the Legacy of Kain series was. It's easily one of my favorite narratives of any franchise I've ever played, and I think it deserved better than what it ended up getting. Despite all of its warts and blemishes, I still think the remastered Defiance is the best way to experience it, and I wish everyone could experience the series' story from start to finish in one way or the other. I'll have some more stuff to talk about soon. Thanks for watching, and take care out there.